She found a lonely puppy on the road, and this is what happened. The day began with a searing hush in the air, a stillness so pronounced that could almost taste the heaviness on her tongue. She had left her apartment earlier than usual, determined to outrun the storm clouds that rumbled across the horizon. Thunder threatened in the distance, and a sharp wind whipped at her hair, slapping it against her face. She barely noticed. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of a recent betrayal at work, of heartbreak lingering from an ended relationship, and of the deep yearning to feel whole again. Every mile she drove felt like an attempt to abandon the wreckage of her life in the mirror. If only it were that simple. If only life's burdens could evaporate with each rotation of the tires on the lonely, deserted highway. She was so lost in thought that she nearly missed the small figure on the road. At first it looked like debris or perhaps a tattered sweater someone had tossed aside. But as she closed in, she realized it was a moving shape, alive and trembling. Her heart lurched into her throat. She veered her car onto the shoulder, ignoring how the tires skidded on the slick asphalt. Rain began to fall in earnest now, drumming on the roof of her old sedan with a relentless patter. She left the engine running, headlights cutting through the gloom, and stepped out into the cold downpour. Each raindrop felt like a small needle on her skin, forced her shoes forward, her breath ragged with a fearful anticipation she didn't quite understand. The battered shape mewled and lifted a tiny head. It was a puppy, emaciated, covered in mud, its fur wet and clinging to every visible rib on its fragile torso. The small creature shivered beneath the relentless onslaught of rain, its eyes wide with a mix of terror and hope. His heart clenched. She wondered if the poor thing had crawled out of an abandoned box, or if someone had simply tossed it onto the pavement to fend for itself. She wasn't sure which thought was more painful. She knelt beside it, letting the rain soak her jeans. The puppy's eyes locked onto hers, and an unspoken plea seemed to radiate from that fragile body. Maybe it was exhaustion, or some primal awareness that told the dog she meant no harm, but the trembling puppy managed to lift a small paw and place it on its knee. In that one moment, an unbreakable bond formed, a tacit promise that she would not leave it there to die alone. Felt tears burning behind her eyelids, mingling with the rain on her cheeks. She scooped the small creature into her arms, whispering hushed reassurances. Inside her, a flicker of purpose sparked to life. She had no clue how or why, but she sensed that saving this puppy was about more than just rescuing an animal. It was something bigger, an invitation to redefine her own story. She rushed back to the car, cradling the wet dog as though it were as precious as a newborn. Her hands shook as she started the engine again, the defroster struggling against the fog that clung to the inside of the windshield. The puppy, still quivering, looked up at her with eyes that mirrored every heartbreak she had ever felt. Set the car's heater to full blast, and gently rubbed the puppy with a sweatshirt she found in the backseat. She couldn't leave the dog alone in some shelter or pass it off to someone else. That was no longer an option. She wondered if it had a mother or sibling somewhere, if it had known kindness before, or if its entire short life had been nothing but cruelty and neglect. The drive back into town felt like an eternity. The dog's little body pressed close against her. Every bump in the road threatened to jostle the puppy from her lap, but she held on. Each time she glanced down, she found those brown eyes watching her intently. In a strange way, it felt as though the puppy was apologizing for existing, as if it believed it was a burden to be carried. Made an unspoken vow to prove otherwise. She would show this small creature that its life mattered, and maybe, in doing so, she might rediscover her own worth. By the time she pulled up in front of her tiny apartment, the rain had intensified, transforming the streets into shallow rivers. She tucked the puppy against her chest and darted inside, fumbling with her keys until the lock clicked open. The apartment was modest, just a studio with worn carpets, a couch that doubled as a bed, and walls painted an uninspiring beige. But it was the coziest sanctuary she could offer. She set the puppy gently on a folded towel near the heater. The dog immediately curled into a trembling ball, small whimpers echoing in the silence. Rummaged through her fridge for something resembling dog-friendly food. Finding only leftover chicken and a carton of plain yogurt, she tentatively offered a small bit to the pup, praying that it wasn't going to upset its stomach. Relief washed through her as the puppy ate with ravenous eagerness, pausing only to glance up, as though to say thank you. The room felt charged with new energy, and realized her tears had not completely subsided. She wiped them quickly, unsure if they were tears of sadness or joy, or perhaps just the echoes of the emotional storm swirling inside her. The puppy's fur was still wet, so she grabbed a clean towel and began to gently dry it. That's when she noticed a raw wound on its hind leg. Blood had caked onto the fur, mixing with mud. Her stomach flipped at the sight. She knew she had to get it cleaned and maybe even stitched. She had limited funds in her bank account. Much of her savings had vanished during the disastrous breakup with her ex. But there was no question that she would do whatever she could to help this dog. Night fell and the rain pounded relentlessly against the windows. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in its mind, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of calm purpose. She called around and finally found a small, family-run veterinary clinic a few blocks away that offered emergency services. Within an hour, she was back in her car, carefully placing the puppy on a blanket in the passenger seat. The roads were slick, headlights reflecting like broken shards of a mirror. Her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel hinted at the residual fear quivering in her heart. Fear not just of losing control on the wet streets, but of failing this life that now depended on her. The clinic was quiet, save for the hum of fluorescent lights. Dr. Martinez, an older veterinarian with kind eyes, ushered them into a small examination room. He examined the puppy's wound, disinfected it, and gave the dog a shot to stave off infection. "He's malnourished," Dr. Martinez murmured, carefully listening to the puppy's heartbeat. "But with proper care, I think he'll recover." Nodded, relief flooding her. She realized then she had been holding her breath. The vet's calm, knowledgeable demeanor soothed her, reinforcing that she'd made the right choice. As was settling the bill, which was mercifully less than she feared, the dog let out a soft whimper. "Doctor." Martinez looked at the puppy and then at, "He needs a home and some love. Doesn't look like he's had much of that." His words felt like they carried a deeper resonance, as though he was speaking about more than just the puppy. She caught his gaze and offered a weak smile, unsure if he could sense the loneliness she also carried. Back in her apartment, the puppy lay curled on the blanket. Gently stroked its tiny head, marveling at the warmth that pulsed beneath the soft fur. She decided to call him Chance. There was something hopeful in that name, something that hinted at redemption and new beginnings for them both. Chance's eyes fluttered closed, exhausted from the ordeal, and he drifted into a quiet sleep. Sat beside him, the hum of the heater and the patter of rain lulling her into reflection. She thought about how lost she'd felt just hours before, and how a single moment, a chance encounter on a deserted road, had changed her course. Sleep finally took her too, right there on the floor next to the puppy she'd vowed to protect. The night was a tapestry of dreams, some filled with the ominous swirl of lightning and the echo of thunder, others with the warmth of a wagging tail and a small creature's unconditional trust. When dawn arrived, it found cradling Chance against her chest, the first faint rays of sun peeking through the curtains. Morning brought a strange sense of clarity. She had to figure out the next steps, food, follow-up vet visits, and how to arrange her schedule around this new responsibility. Adopting Chance felt monumental, like stepping into a role she had never before considered. But a calm resolve took hold in her. She knew she couldn't fail him. She ran a quick mental inventory of her budget, deciding to cut back on certain indulgences. She could live without fancy coffee or weekend trips if it meant giving Chance the care he deserved. That first week turned into a whirlwind of adjustments. Worked a cubicle job at a marketing firm, and while her responsibilities were not particularly exciting, they paid the bills. She managed to negotiate partial remote work to keep an eye on Chance, especially while he was still healing. Her boss, Ms. Redding, initially resisted, but after disclosed the dog's condition, perhaps overplaying the severity just a bit, her boss agreed to a trial arrangement. The extra time at home was crucial. Chance needed medication and carefully measured meals to rebuild his strength. Every day, he seemed to grow more vibrant. His coat started to shine as the dryness and matted fur gave way to healthy strands. The wound on his hind leg began to heal, though he'd sometimes limp if he put too much weight on it. Watched with a quiet awe as he explored the apartment, sniffing corners, investigating the potted plants on her windowsill, or curling up at her feet while she typed reports for her job. More than once she caught herself smiling without realizing it. Her heart felt lighter, less burdened by the chaos she'd been carrying. Still, life had a way of reminding her that not everything was perfect. The marketing firm was behind on a major campaign, and Ms. Redding was cracking down on performance metrics. Found herself juggling deadlines and dog care, constantly feeling that tight anxiety build in her chest. Some nights she stayed up until 3 in the morning, finishing spreadsheets and drafting social media strategies, only to wake again at 6 to walk Chance. When exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she'd look into Chance's eyes and remember why she had taken on this responsibility. If she could reclaim her own sense of worth by saving him, maybe she could salvage other parts of her life, too. Then came an unexpected phone call. It was her ex, Daniel, the one who had left her life in shambles, financially and emotionally. He claimed he wanted to meet to discuss tying up loose ends. She still felt the sting of betrayal whenever she thought of him. The lies, the discovered text messages, the heartbreak that left her feeling worthless. She hesitated. Did she want to dredge all that up again? But a part of her recognized that closure might be necessary. She tentatively agreed to meet him the following Saturday at a coffee shop near her apartment. The days leading up to that meeting were tense. Chance, ever intuitive, seemed to pick up on her distress. He would stay close, resting his chin on her lap or licking her hand in a silent show of comfort. Despite the storm of emotions swirling within her, she found strength in the dog's unwavering presence. On Saturday morning, she walked out of her apartment, casting one last glance at Chance. He was staring at her with those soulful eyes, a silent "I believe in you" that echoed in her heart. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and pastries. It should have been comforting, but felt her stomach twist when she saw Daniel seated in a corner, nursing a latte. He looked up at her with a half-smile. The conversation was awkward, filled with half-hearted attempts at civility. He mentioned money he still owed her for some of the wedding deposits, promising that he would pay it back soon. She remained skeptical but agreed to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe people could change. At some point, he asked about her life, whether she was okay. The question felt laced with pity. She mentioned the dog, how she had rescued him off the road. Something about her voice changed when she talked about Chance, and Daniel noticed. His expression softened, as though he were seeing a side of her he had never bothered to notice before. Realized with a start that she felt no romantic longing for him anymore. There was only a faint sadness that they could not have been better people to each other. As she left she felt oddly liberated. She didn't need his approval or his apology in the same way she once had. She had Chance, and in caring for him, she had rediscovered her own inner strength. Weeks turned to months and found a new rhythm. Each day started with taking Chance for a walk along the river trail near her apartment complex. The quiet mornings, with dew clinging to the grass and the sun just beginning to rise, felt peaceful in ways she'd almost forgotten to appreciate. Chance loved the tall grasses and the occasional squirrel, bounding forward with that puppy enthusiasm that forced her to keep up. Her heart swelled each time he wagged his tail or nudged her hand for a pat. It was as though every step they took together was a small triumph over the darkness that once threatened to consume them both. But life was not done testing them. Late one night, after had tucked in Chance and was finishing up a work project, Her phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Redding. The company had lost a major client. Layoffs might be looming. Eyes burned from staring at the screen so long, and worry gnawed at her insides. She remembered the precarious position of her bank account. Taking care of Chance was a blessing, but it also came with costs: vet bills, food, supplies. Now her job security was teetering on the edge of a cliff. She forced herself to breathe, leaning down to gently stroke the sleeping dog's back. He let out a soft sigh, unconsciously comforting her. In that moment, she resolved to fight for what she cared about, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. The following day, she marched into the office. The tension was palpable. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones, and Ms. Redding looked like she was perpetually bracing for an impact. Took her chance, pun intended, and proposed a new marketing strategy for the firm's struggling digital campaigns. She had spent countless nights researching, staying up late after Chance fell asleep. She laid out her ideas in a concise, passionate presentation, highlighting cost-effective methods and innovative approaches that could attract new clients. Her fingers trembled on the keyboard as she spoke, but her voice never wavered. She was done letting life happen to her. She was ready to take control. In a twist that felt almost surreal, Redding responded with unexpected enthusiasm. Impressed by his initiative, she asked her to spearhead the campaign. The days that followed were some of the busiest and most fulfilling had experienced in a long time. She poured her heart into the project, fueled by the new sense of purpose that had been awakened within her since saving Chance. She worked late but made sure to run home when she could to let Chance out, feed him, and give him a bit of attention before returning to the office. There were nights she felt guilty about leaving him alone, but she promised herself it was temporary. She was building a more secure future for both of them. Miraculously, the campaign gained traction. Even Ms. Redding admitted that fresh perspective was revitalizing the firm. They landed a couple of smaller accounts, and though they hadn't fully replaced the lost major client, things were looking up. Began to see as a rising star, someone worth collaborating with. She no longer felt invisible behind her cubicle walls. It was as if the act of saving Chance had kindled a fire inside her she never knew she possessed. Amid the successes, however, a new challenge emerged. Chance began limping again, this time more severely. Noticed he struggled to run on their morning walks, whimpering occasionally. Alarmed, she took him back to Dr. Martinez, who performed more thorough x-rays. The vet discovered a tiny fracture had never fully healed. It might have occurred before found him, potentially from a cruel kick or a car's tire. His heart seized at the thought. Dr. Martinez recommended surgery to correct the fracture, cautioning that without it, Chance's leg might never be truly stable. The cost was daunting. Even with the pay bump that might come if her campaign succeeded, she was barely scraping by. But the decision was made before she even thought about the cost. She'd find a way. She started a small online fundraiser, posting Chance's story on social media. She was hesitant. She'd never asked for help so openly before. But the outpouring of support floored her. Friends, and even strangers donated. They were moved by the tale of the lonely puppy rescued on a stormy road, by his quiet determination to see him flourish. Within 2 weeks, she had raised enough to cover most of the surgery. The rest she put on her credit card, telling herself she'd figure it out somehow. The morning of the surgery, she was a bundle of nerves. She held Chance in her arms as they waited in the clinic lobby. He licked her chin, as though trying to reassure her that everything would be fine. When Dr. Martinez took him back to the operating room, felt an ache in her chest as if a part of her heart went with him. Hours ticked by slowly, and she paced the waiting room until her legs cramped. Finally, Dr. Martinez emerged, still wearing his scrubs and a reassuring smile. The surgery had gone well. Chance would need weeks of gentle rehabilitation, but he was expected to recover fully. Let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, tears prickling her eyes. The relief was short-lived. That afternoon, Ms. Redding called with urgent news. A big client was expressing interest in their new digital strategy. They wanted to see a pitch immediately, and Ms. Redding insisted be the one to do it. The meeting was set for first thing in the morning. Looked at Chance, groggy from anesthesia but safe in her arms, and wondered how she was going to juggle everything. She'd planned on taking a couple of days off to care for him post-surgery, but now it seemed she had to choose. Attend the meeting and potentially secure her position and the firm's future, or stay home and miss the one shot at a major contract they desperately needed. She decided to do both, even though it felt impossible. She prepared the pitch from home, setting up Chance's recovery area right beside her desk. She worked late into the night, her heart torn between worrying for him and focusing on the client's demands. Her eyelids felt like lead by the time she finally clicked save on the presentation. She grabbed a few hours of sleep on the couch, awakening each time Chance whimpered for attention or to adjust his position. At dawn, she carefully tucked him into his crate, leaving detailed instructions for a visiting nurse she had hastily arranged through a local pet care service. She hated the idea of leaving him, but she couldn't let her team down. The office buzzed with anticipation. Ms. Redding looked more stressed than ever. Arrived with coffee in hand, nerves buzzing. She set up the conference room with all the materials, double-checking every slide of the pitch deck. The clients arrived, a trio of serious-faced executives, and the meeting began. Spoke with a conviction she barely recognized in herself, driven by the love and responsibility she felt for Chance. She explained how the firm's approach was both visionary and grounded in real data, weaving in stories of success and growth potential. By the time she finished, her voice carried a confidence that seemed to eclipse the self-doubt she once wore like a cloak. When the executives left, Ms. Redding let out a sigh of relief. One of them had pulled her aside, quietly remarking that passion was contagious. They'd be in touch soon. Hurriedly packed up her things, ignoring her congratulations. She needed to get back to Chance. She didn't breathe easy until she was home again, kneeling by his side, stroking his soft ears, whispering apologies for leaving him even for a few hours. He blinked up at her with that unwavering trust that made her chest tighten. In his eyes, there was no betrayal, only love. She realized in that moment that she was no longer the same woman she'd been before finding him on the road. She was stronger, braver, and far more compassionate, both to others and to herself. The days blurred into a flurry of medical checkups for Chance and follow-ups with the prospective client. Rehabilitation exercises dominated their mornings and evenings, holding his hind legs gently as he practiced bearing weight again. Sometimes, he'd yelp, and she'd feel a pang of guilt that she might be pushing him too hard. But Dr. Martinez insisted that consistent therapy was critical for a full recovery. She drew on the same determination she'd mustered to survive her own heartbreak and financial woes. If she could endure betrayal and career uncertainty, she could guide Chance through this. One afternoon, a call came in that nearly made her collapse with joy. The new client, a multinational brand in the tech industry, had decided to sign with the firm. His campaign pitch had clinched it. Not only did this mean the firm was safe from layoffs, but Ms. Redding offered a promotion to account manager. The raise would help with her growing pile of bills, and the role would allow her to shape creative directions more freely. She realized how drastically her life had changed since that stormy evening she'd stopped to pick up a broken creature on the highway. But the best moments were the small ones. Watching Chance regain his playful spirit, seeing him hobble less and wag his tail more each day, or the mornings when she woke to find him curled at her feet, eyes closed in blissful trust. She took him on longer walks as he grew stronger, exploring new trails and visiting dog-friendly parks. Strangers would stop to pet him, remarking on how sweet and gentle he was. Would smile, proud of how far they'd come. Then came the night everything changed again. Was returning from a late work session, having picked up Chance from a friend who'd watched him for the evening. She was driving through a part of town she rarely visited, a shortcut to avoid traffic. Streetlights were sporadic and the roads were riddled with potholes. Chance was in the backseat, harnessed safely, letting out a quiet whine every now and then. She tried to soothe him with her voice, but her own nerves were frayed. Something felt off. A creeping sense of dread slithered into her mind like a cold wind. Suddenly, a dark figure stumbled into the street, slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, the locking across her chest. The man looked disoriented, possibly injured. She hesitated, a swirl of thoughts rushing through her head. Was this a setup for a robbery, or was he genuinely in need of help? Chance let out a sharp bark, as if spurring her to action. She rolled down the window slightly, calling out to the figure. He turned, revealing a bloodied face and terror in his eyes. He yelled something about an accident, about someone trapped. Pulled over, adrenaline surging. She grabbed her phone, telling the man she'd call an ambulance. But he begged her to follow him instead. "My sister is in the car. It's down the embankment, please." Her stomach lurched. She couldn't just drive away. She unhooked Chance's harness, holding him firmly. Caution warred with compassion, but in her heart she knew she had to help. She followed the man, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, Chance trotting nervously at her side. They navigated a steep slope, the ground slick with dew. At the bottom lay a car, overturned, steam curling from the engine. The headlights were still on, illuminating the wreckage in a haunting glow. She could see a young woman trapped, unconscious, pinned by twisted metal. His throat tightened. She dialed 911, barking out the location and details, her voice shaky but urgent. The minutes that followed were a blur of panic and desperate improvisation. The man, who introduced himself as, frantically tried to pry open the passenger door to free his sister. Stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, her pulse hammering. She wrapped Chance's leash around a nearby tree, though he whined in protest, as if sensing the danger. Soon, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights danced against the darkness. Firefighters, paramedics, and police officers descended on the scene. They used the jaws of life to extract the trapped woman while a paramedic examined. Felt lightheaded, but she refused to step away. She wanted to see if the woman would be okay, to make sure got proper care. Chance barked anxiously from his spot near the tree, pulling against the leash as though he wanted to help. After what felt like an eternity, the woman was freed. She was alive, battered but responsive. Paramedics rushed her onto a stretcher and began administering first aid. Stumbled toward, tears streaking his bloodied face. Without warning, he pulled her into a grateful hug. She froze for a moment, then gently patted his back. The raw emotion in the air was palpable, a potent reminder of how fragile life can be. Police took statements, guiding through the events step by step. She handed over her contact information and then retrieved Chance, who pressed himself against her leg, trembling. She stroked his ears, whispering, "It's okay now." One of the officers, noticing Chance's limp, asked if he was hurt. She briefly recounted how she'd found him abandoned months ago, how he was still recovering from surgery. The officer's face softened. "You've got a good heart," he said. Brushed off the compliment, too overwhelmed by the night's events to accept praise. She drove home in a daze. Chance was restless, pacing in the backseat until she calmed him with a gentle hand. As she climbed into bed, exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. But her mind was aflame with haunting images of twisted metal and bleeding foreheads. She thought about how fleeting existence can be, how any moment could be our last. Yet here she was, still breathing with a second chance at life, both she and the puppy who had come to symbolize hope. Sleep was elusive. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with swirling sirens, watery headlights, and the memory of that desperate, stormy night she'd found Chance. In a dreamlike haze, she recalled hearing a voice, maybe her own subconscious, telling her that saving Chance was just the beginning. She woke in the early hours of the morning, heart pounding. Chance lay curled against her, nose tucked under her arm. She watched him, feeling an unfamiliar sensation, gratitude. For the hardships, the heartbreak, the near tragedies, because somehow they had led her to a life infused with purpose. Word spread about S's role in helping the accident victims. A local news station picked up the story after police and paramedics relayed what happened. Reporters were intrigued by the ordinary woman who risked her safety to save a total stranger. Found the attention embarrassing, but Ms. Redding saw an opportunity. She allowed to share her story on the company's social media pages, weaving it into a narrative of community outreach and compassion. Almost overnight, the post went viral. People resonated with the tale of a woman who had rescued a stray puppy and then helped rescue strangers from a car crash. It was a feel-good story that cut through the cynicism of daily headlines. Was bombarded with interview requests. She felt shy about the spotlight, but Ms. Redding encouraged her to participate, believing it would bring positive publicity for the firm. So did a few interviews, always placing the focus on Chance and on the bravery of the first responders. She insisted she was just an ordinary person who happened to be at the right place at the right time. Yet the public adored her humility. The story trended for several days, racking up shares and comments praising her kindness. Some people even recognized her in public, offering words of thanks or small gifts for Chance, dog treats, toys, personalized collars. She laughed at the surrealism of it all, remembering how just a year ago, she'd felt like the most invisible person in the world. Amid the newfound attention, something extraordinary happened. A senior executive from the multinational brand they had recently signed came across S's viral story. Touched by her authenticity and compassion, he decided to partner with the marketing firm on a cause-based campaign, focusing on pet adoption and community heroism. Was appointed the campaign lead. It was a dream project, merging her newfound passion for animal welfare with her professional skill set. She plunged into it with gusto, meeting with animal shelters, organizing adoption events, and working with creative teams to craft heartfelt messages that urged people to consider saving a life, just as she had done. Of course, not everyone welcomed her success. Some grew envious, whispering about how lucky she was, how she'd only become a star because of a random dog in an accident scene. Tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on the good she could do with her new platform. She arranged for a portion of the campaign's proceeds to go toward local shelters, negotiating with Ms. Redding and the clients until they agreed. Each small victory felt like a testament to Chance's impact on her life. Months passed in a whirlwind of meetings, event planning, and carefully orchestrated marketing pushes. Chance continued to improve, his limp becoming barely noticeable. He accompanied to some of the events, delighting children and adults alike. They'd pet him, hearing the story of how he once lay abandoned on a stormy road. Every gentle wag of his tail was a reminder of resilience. Often thought back to the moment she first saw him, a trembling, mud-splattered scrap of life, and how he had changed everything. One crisp autumn evening, they wrapped up the largest adoption event of the campaign. Over 50 animals found homes, and the atmosphere buzzed with happy tears and wagging tails. Was exhausted but elated, handing out final brochures, exchanging contact information with shelter volunteers. Chance dozed in a little pen behind her makeshift desk, occasionally perking up to greet new admirers. That's when Dr. Martinez appeared, smiling as he approached. He had come to support the event, wearing his veterinarian uniform, a stethoscope peeking out from his jacket. "You did a wonderful thing here," he said, looking around at the families hugging their new pets. "I'm proud of you." Tears sprang to her eyes. Dr. Martinez was one of the first people who had helped her realize that saving Chance was possible, that love and hope were worth the investment. She remembered how he disinfected Chance's wound and spoke softly about giving him a real home. She thanked him, voice trembling with emotion. They chatted about how the campaign might continue, how more animals could be saved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, felt a sensation akin to warmth filling her chest. She'd once believed she was too broken to make a difference. Now, standing amidst families who had just discovered the joy of adopting homeless pets, she realized that her broken places had allowed her to become a vessel for hope. Just when life seemed like it couldn't be more fulfilling, it offered one more twist. A letter arrived in the mail, an ornate envelope with gold-embossed lettering. It was an invitation to a fundraising gala hosted by a prominent philanthropic organization. They wanted to honor her as a local hero who inspired thousands through her viral story and charitable campaign. His breath caught in her throat. She felt unworthy of such a title, but there it was in black and white, and that her actions had rippled out in ways she never expected. She debated whether to attend. She hated the spotlight, but Ms. Redding insisted it was a networking opportunity they couldn't pass up. Her close friends encouraged her to go, reminding her she deserved the recognition. In her heart, she worried about leaving Chance alone for yet another event. Yet the desire to make more connections for the cause, to potentially save even more animals, finally swayed her. She decided to go, promising herself she'd keep it humble. The night of the gala was surreal. The venue was a grand hotel ballroom filled with glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests. Felt awkward in her borrowed gown, her makeup carefully done by a friend. Cameras flashed as soon as she stepped out of the car. She could practically hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears, but she forced a smile, reminding herself why she was there. Inside, classical music played softly. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of. She recognized a few faces from local news outlets, philanthropic circles, and even from the viral coverage of her story. They greeted her with handshakes and polite smiles. She spotted Ms. Redding in the crowd, discreetly giving her a thumbs up. The sense of ceremony was overwhelming. She gravitated toward a quieter corner, sipping a glass of water to soothe her nerves. Eventually, the MC took the stage, welcoming everyone and introducing the honorees. Palms started to sweat. She sat at a table near the front, the lights making her feel exposed. Her mind drifted to Chance, back home with a trusted friend. She longed to have him there, resting his chin on her foot, grounding her in the moment. But she had to stand alone tonight, a testament to everything they'd accomplished. When her name was called, a hush fell over the crowd. She walked onto the stage, heart hammering. The MC relayed the short version of her story: a lonely puppy abandoned on the road, an impulsive rescue that changed multiple lives, culminating in a viral movement encouraging pet adoption and compassion. The applause was thunderous, and it took every ounce of willpower not to cry. She received a small plaque and a bouquet of roses, the significance of which felt heavier than anything she'd ever held before. The microphone was offered to her. She swallowed hard, scanning the audience. This was the moment, the pinnacle of everything that had happened since she found Chance. She spoke haltingly at first, voice trembling with emotion. I don't really consider myself a hero," she began. "All I did was stop for a puppy when others passed him by. But that night when I found him cold and alone on the road, he saved me as much as I saved him." She took a breath, blinking back tears. "He gave me purpose. And as I got to know his spirit, I learned that compassion isn't just about grand gestures. It's about small, everyday decisions to care for someone besides yourself." She went on to thank Dr. Martinez, her, and the donors. She spoke of the families who had adopted pets through their campaign, the strangers who had reached out with stories of their own rescues. As she finished, she felt the energy in the room shift. People were moved, some wiping tears, others nodding in agreement. For a moment, she felt invincible, as though love and kindness were the strongest forces in the world. When she returned home that night, exhausted but glowing from the experience, Chance greeted her with a feeble wag of his tail, half asleep but eager to welcome her back. She sank onto the couch, letting the gown spill around her, pulling him into a gentle hug. The tears that fell now were ones of sheer gratitude. In the soft glow of the streetlight through the window, she whispered, "Thank you," repeatedly against his fur. Thank you for surviving, for trusting, for giving her life a meaning she never thought possible. As the weeks progressed, felt a lingering sense of wonder every time she woke up. She continued her work at the firm, balancing the demands of her new account manager role with her ongoing commitment to animal welfare. She joined the board of a local shelter, leveraging her marketing skills to increase adoption rates. Chance was her constant companion, each wag of his tail a reminder of how small acts of kindness could spark unimaginable transformations. One day, she received a message on social media from a woman named. She claimed to have information about Chance's past. His heart pounded as she read the words. Said she had recognized Chance from the viral photos and believed he was from a litter bred illegally in a backyard operation known for neglect. The woman apologized profusely for being too scared to intervene at the time. Felt a surge of anger and sadness. She had known Chance's life before her must have been dire, but to see it confirmed so plainly broke her heart all over again. Offered to meet and provide details that might help shut down the breeder. A wave of protectiveness coursed through. Chance was safe now, but what about other dogs trapped in cruel situations? She arranged to meet at a local diner. Over coffee, revealed troubling details. A neighbor breeding dogs in filthy conditions, selling them at cut-rate prices, or sometimes abandoning the ones that didn't sell. Had moved away but never forgot the horror she'd witnessed. With newfound connections and the platform from her viral story, they decided to take action. They reported it to the authorities, providing every piece of evidence and testimony they could gather. The legal wheels turned slowly, but eventually, a raid was conducted. Authorities found multiple animals in squalid conditions, confirming the cruelty that had once plagued Chance's early life. The dogs were rescued, transferred to shelters and foster homes. The entire ordeal stirred up local and even national attention, once again shining a spotlight on as an advocate for animals. She participated in press releases, interviews, and public awareness campaigns, determined to ensure that no other dog would suffer as Chance once had. Yet, throughout it all, focus remained on the life she had built with Chance. They had come so far, and she treasured every ordinary moment, like playing fetch in the park, or curling up on the couch to watch late-night TV, or even stepping out into the yard just to bask in the morning sun. The more she gave to the world, the more she found that her own heart healed. Every scar, every memory of betrayal or loneliness became part of a tapestry of resilience, woven through with threads of love. On a brisk winter morning, was walking Chance along the same stretch of road where she had once found him. She hadn't planned to revisit that spot. She'd just driven aimlessly, lost in thought, and somehow ended up there. The sky was cloudless, the sunlight glinting off the asphalt. The memory of that stormy night came rushing back with startling clarity. She could almost taste the rain. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding Chance's leash tightly. When she opened them, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She knelt down and stroked Chance's fur. He turned to her, tail wagging slowly. It was as though he sensed the significance of this place. She bent her head and kissed the top of his muzzle, tears escaping down her cheeks. "Look how far we've come," she whispered. A gust of wind swept across the road, rustling the overgrown grass. In that moment, realized the full magnitude of everything that had happened since she had chosen to stop, to care, to believe that one small life was worth saving. She thought about all the lives changed by that decision. Hers, Chance's, the accident victims she had later helped, the animals rescued in the breeder's raid, and the many families who had adopted pets through the campaign. It was like a ripple effect, each act of kindness extending outward, touching countless souls. The wind died down, leaving a stillness so unlike the stormy chaos of the night she'd found him. In the quiet, she heard nothing but the soft panting of the dog she adored. She stood, her heart filled with a sense of completion, as though this was a final piece of the puzzle snapping into place. They walked back to the car, side by side, stepping forward into whatever future awaited them. For the lesson was clear. Hope can rise from the most desolate circumstances, and love can mend even the deepest wounds. She glanced at Chance, and he looked back as if to say, "I'm here. We'll face everything together." And in that silent exchange, she felt an unbreakable faith in life's beauty, a profound conviction that no matter how dark the road may seem, a single act of compassion can illuminate the path for all who wander in the shadows. As the car pulled away, the lonely highway stretched behind them, but it was no longer a place of sorrow. It was the birthplace of a transformative bond. In every mile she drove, in every decision she made, carried the memory of that forsaken, rain-soaked puppy and the promise she'd made to him in the storm. She had found him broken and alone, but they had healed each other in ways neither could have anticipated. And that, above all else, was the miracle worth sharing with the world.